Well, great. So, yeah, we were today going to talk about kind of awakening experiences, altered states of consciousness, higher states of consciousness, mystical experiences, just sort of that realm of things. And so there is this account that is recorded. It was from a letter, uh, excuse me, from a Japanese executive who was 47 years old in 1953, and he wrote a letter to, I think, his teacher or some Zen master. And so I was just gonna go ahead and paraphrase that letter about a pretty powerful awakening experience he had, and then we were just gonna kind of talk about it. So, excuse me. So, yes, he was riding on a train in Japan on his way home with his wife, and he was reading a Zen book. And he had read this passage before, but it really hit him hard this time. So the short passage is, I came to realize clearly that mind is no other than mountains and rivers and the great wide earth, the sun and the moon and the stars. And it just struck him very powerfully. And he was actually moved to tears, and he covered his face with his handkerchief. So he arrived home with his wife. His brother and his brother's wife were visiting, and he went to bed around 11 or 11:30. And then he woke up at midnight. Excuse me. And then he was kind of groggy for a little while, but then he kind of became struck, and that passage kept repeating in his mind. And so he says he was struck as though by lightning, and the next instant heaven and earth crumbled and disappeared. Instantly, like surging waves, a tremendous delight welled up in me, a veritable hurricane of delight as I laughed loudly and wildly. And so he laughs, and he said, there's no reasoning here, no reasoning at all. Keeps laughing. He said, the empty sky split in two, then opened its enormous mouth and began to laugh uproariously, laughing, laughing. Later, one of the members of my family told me that my laughter had sounded inhuman. And so he's like elated. He suddenly sat up and he struck the bed with all his might, and he beat the floor with his feet as if trying to smash it, laughing riotously all the time. And he said his wife and his youngest son were frightened. His wife tried to cover his mouth. And he said, I've come to enlightenment. Shakyamuni and the patriarchs haven't deceived me. They haven't deceived me. And so he remembers crying out. Uh, and as he was writing the letter in this account, he said, even now my skin is quivering as I write. And he went to see his teacher the next day. He tried to describe to him the experience. He was yelling, I am overjoyed, I'm overjoyed. Uh, and his teacher kind of encouraged him. He said, you are to be congratulated more than once. And he kind of gave him tips on how to further his training. And he said he spent the next day or two kind of a lot of it by himself. His body was shaking, laughing, and weeping. Yeah, just an utterly kind of amazing experience that was struck by. And I don't know, to me, it's very inspiring. When I first heard about this in the Waking Up app, and I'll put a link to it. It's in the Koan Way, a Zen kind of series of Zen recordings in the Waking Up app, and it's also in this book, the Three Pillars of Zen by Philip Kapleau, on around page 228, kind of a classic of Zen in the West. But yeah, it was just kind of, I mean, I don't know. That's just such a inspiring, yeah, passage for me. It just kind of makes you want to have an awakening experience or just makes you think that there's really something there.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. Do you have much have you read much other Zen stuff?
Not much, like a little bit, like maybe a couple other books. I've read some things by maybe mostly Thich Nhat Hanh,
Mm, mm.
the Vietnamese Zen monk. Yeah, a couple, two or three books by him. And I've now read some of this book, The Three Pillars of Zen, and liked it a lot. Um, but yeah, I've never even been to a Zen monastery. As far as I know, I've been to a couple of Zen, Buddhist temples, but yeah, yeah, don't have much experience with Zen.
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah. I have some experience with Zen, limited. It was sort of my first introduction to spiritual work or meditation, more specifically. And I think for me it was a similar thing, the sense of it being something real, something that happens in the world. There being people actually practicing it. It's not something I'm just going to read about in a book that happened a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah, what did you think about this account, or have you heard other awakening accounts? Or yeah, how did this strike you? Because it really made an impression on me. Like I've shared this with many people, and
well, I'm curious, like what, because I've heard some others. There's in other koans, there's less. Less descriptive. There's one of the guy, the somebody was sweeping, and he hit a pebble with his broom and it knocked off another rock and it made a noise. And in that moment, like he woke up. Right. He had this,
yeah,
but it doesn't say the sky split into a mouth and was laughing and I
yeah,
was overcome and I'm overjoyed and like the emotional element of it.
yeah,
Um, so this is more of a report, it seems like, than an actual koan from like
hmm
historical Zen. The
hmm
when it was in a lot of the koans come from Japan or they come from China,
hmm
because Zen was originally Chan Buddhism in China,
hmm
which traces back through the lineage to India, and it was called Jhana, Jnana, I think,
hmm
from the Sanskrit, Jnana Buddhism, which is I think about focus of attention.
hmm
But it evolved over the years, and um, so a lot of the stories come from those times, from like
hmm
the patriarchs, the
hmm
leaders of Zen in China in the old days and in Japan in the old days.
hmm
So the detail that you find in this recounting is a little more in depth
hmm
than usual.
yeah.
Yeah,
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 it
yeah,
hasn't
yeah.
turned into like sort of, it hasn't coalesced into sort of a myth or a koan or something. Maybe it will in 100 or 200 years or something, but right now we're getting more just the direct kind of in prose account of it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But with all koans, it's like because this is used, I think, this is used as an example of what koan study can do
yeah,
in the Waking Up app. But even if it in itself, like a koan, not that I've done much koan practice, but I've heard a lot of Dharma discussions discussing a koan,
hmm
from my years with the Zen group. I used to sit with the Zen group in New York,
mm,
the Mountains and Rivers Order. Um, and it's usually like you want to respond to it in some way. There's
mm,
a it's the koan itself is a call, and then sort of from your teacher. It's a functional thing between the student and teacher. So it's a call from the teacher, and you as the student have to come in from meditation, face-to-face teaching with the teacher, and give a reply to
mm,
the koan. And then the teacher sort of is able to judge your level of realization from your reply,
mm.
and will tell you, kind of use that to help guide you with your practice or with your focus or how it works. Um,
And maybe we should say a koan, it tends to be some kind of paradoxical or not really rationally or seemingly rational kind of statement. that can help speed your way to enlightenment, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess I should start out with a little disclaimer. Um, in Zen, I think one of there's many collections of koans. One thing that I remember that I feel is important to say is there's this idea of like every time you try and talk about it, you make the grass grow higher. So
Mm,
it's harder to see.
mm,
Um, and so and yet you have to talk about it. So that's
mm,
right there is like, well, what do you do? I don't want to say, oh, well, it's this and this and this, and then everybody's looking at, oh, well, it has to be this way and this way and this way, and then if I just
mm,
do it in this formula, then I will get enlightenment on the other side. And
mm,
that's not at all how it works, and that's the
mm,
dangers of talking about any of this kind of
mm,
stuff. Is it formula people can formalize it in their head and
mm.
then think that, oh, well, if I just follow it, then I will get this thing.
Yeah,
And not that I'm in any way enlightened, but I know enough to know that you don't get it.
yeah.
It's not something that you achieve, or it's something other than that, which maybe we
Mm,
can explore and see what comes up. But I'm not going to try and be like, this is what it actually is, because
mm,
I think I've just explained why.
mm.
But yeah, um, I kind of lost my trail. I'm a little tired today. I haven't been sleeping well, so forgive me
Oh,
if I.
sorry. Yeah.
But no, it's fine. It's
But
fine.
oh, we were just kind of talking about well, I had said we should give some kind of definition of what koans are as we're
Mm,
talking about how they're used in Zen. And you were saying, yeah, and what I've heard is that yeah, it's about uh yeah, your sort of understanding of the koan, your better word realization uh is something that the teacher, a good teacher can kind of gauge as you're kind of talking about it. But it's
mm,
really interesting because it's not like there's an answer, right? Like this is what it means. The monkey's paw symbolizes this, and it's about, it's about this historical event done. Okay, yeah, you get it now. No, it's more how your mind, I don't know. It's more like, yeah, how your mind is coming to a realization of a greater depth of itself or of reality or something like that. How you're sort of less enthralled by concepts, something like that, and you're less dividing the world up into like narrow concepts or something like that. But basically, you're kind of getting closer to enlightenment or further away from the opposite of enlightenment, which is isn't it something like this extreme attachment to identities of yourself, reality, and parsing things up in like a narrow kind of way, something like that. It's you're getting to something like some kind of beginner's mind, some kind of child's mind or something like that as an adult.
mm. I mean, yeah. It's hard to say if there's an opposite to enlightenment.
Mm,
Um, in and of itself, the concept or the idea of enlightenment is a bit of a koan because you
mm,
can't really talk about it. Anytime
mm,
you say it's like when you say, "Oh, well, the opposite of enlightenment is like these concepts and these labels." I'm like, yeah, I get. You can say that. You can say if you're stuck in concepts, if you're stuck in this is the way things are, like you're missing the point.
mm,
The Buddha Dharma says um, everything is suffering, everything is discomforting. There's nothing lasts forever. Everything is kind of interdependent on itself, and nothing has a unique and inherent self.
mm,
Everything fades, and nothing has a self, if I'm
mm,
remembering correctly.
mm,
Um, they're called the three marks of existence, and so enlightenment
mm,
is realizing that. And
mm,
so, yeah, you can say that having a concept of, oh, I am myself, and that means that I will always be feeling this way, and I will always, you know, um, label myself in this way. It's to take like a snapshot of yourself in the moment and just be thinking that this is me
mm,
instead of like, oh, well, this is just a moment in my experience.
mm,
Um, but even that snapshot is to some degree that is enlightenment. I mean,
mm,
they talk about Buddha nature is something that we all inherently have, and we just
Mm,
sort of forget it, or we somehow don't realize it. That's why it's called realization. Like, oh, this is what
mm,
was the case all along, and I just didn't really know.
mm,
Um, and so to posit something as the opposite of enlightenment implies that enlightenment cannot exist if you have this thing. And it's kind of true, but it's also kind of not true. It has
mm,
much more to do with, I suppose, where your attention is and how you're using it.
mm,
And it's something you can grow rather than, or the attention, not the enlightenment. It's you can
mm,
sort of grow towards it rather than, and sometimes it's very sudden and sometimes it takes years and years. And, traditionally it would be lifetimes, but also there's plenty of koans like in our story here where the guy, has the awakening moment and the teacher confirms it.
mm,
In the Tibetan tradition, though, they do a thing called pointing out where you go to the teacher and the teacher like watches you, I guess kind of you could say with their whole nervous system, like they're kind of very attuned to you. And they'll
mm,
recognize a moment where like in something in your eyes or something in your demeanor or whatever sort of shows that some part of your mind has shifted and
mm,
you're in this moment of enlightenment and you don't even realize it. And that's
mm,
pointing out. So when they point it out to you,
mm,
that's it. And then it's up to
mm,
you to kind of try and maintain it
mm,
over time. So it's both something you have and something you remember, but then also it's not a something at all.
mhm,
And then this is why I think you need koans, because the koans will, if you are coming at them with a purely conceptual mind, they'll freeze you. You'll get stuck. They become a
mm,
barrier.
mhm,
One of the first koans I think people are usually given is a monk goes to the teacher Joshu and he says, the monk, the student says, well, tell me, does a dog have Buddha nature? Which is kind of an impossible question because you can't say yes to that and you can't say no to it. But so he's kind of trying to trap the teacher. Well, what are you going to say, Mr. Smarty Pants, Mr. Enlightened Teacher? And the teacher just says moo,
mm,
and there's no like that's the koan.
mm,
How do you like if not that I'm your teacher, but like if I'm the student, if the teacher gives that to me, how do I respond to that? What do I even say to
mm,
move to and you can't be like, well, maybe he meant that dogs have Buddha nature, but also they don't. And like, I don't know, what like there's no right answer to does a dog have Buddha nature?
mm,
That doesn't really matter. Be nice to dogs. You know,
mm,
worry about your own Buddha nature.
mm,
But I don't know. I've never, like I said, I've never done koan training, so I don't know. Saying that might be a good answer. That might be it might pass the inspection, so to speak, or
mm,
it may not, and it may have nothing to do with the words I say. It may have more to do with the energy I bring or the spirit that is shown through my words. I
mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that
That's
makes
kind of
sense.
guesswork, but I think it's more along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, what you said earlier about, yeah, the kind of difficulty of understanding koans, it made me think that you could say that about philosophy too. I have that experience sometimes with talking about philosophy to some people who haven't had much experience with sort of thinking philosophically seemingly, and they're trying to give like a social science or textbook sort of explanation of it. And yeah, it seems like kind of on the surface, like it's not understanding things as a whole, or the sort of almost like a visceral feeling that I have sometimes. um but
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, this account that I read at the beginning about the Japanese executive. Yeah, this is a particularly, as his teacher mentioned, it's a particularly strong kind of awakening experience, right? Like, yeah, the kind of, yeah, empty. I mean, there is a paradox, right, in his account. The empty sky opened its mouth up and laughed with like a thousand mouths or something like that. If it's empty, I mean, it doesn't have a mouth or anything to laugh with, seemingly. But that was one thing. I don't know, it really appealed to me. Um, I guess what I thought of is I have this sense of, I think I got this from Joseph Campbell from that video that actually you mentioned to people, including me in high school, like the hero with a thousand faces, or no, the different faces of myths. Anyway, it's the Bill Moyers
Hmm.
PBS kind of series, and he talked about how, in his view, there's all kinds of different divinities that tend to be like good or evil. And but he said there's a sort of deeper idea of God slash reality beyond all that, beyond morality and everything. And if you can, and I have the idea that if you can, in your sort of philosophical thinking, you can kind of come to an understanding of the morality of good and evil and everything. But then you can also have a sense of something beyond that reality of nature, of, the law of tooth and claw, and tragedy, and suffering and death, and the minuteness of yourself, and you can be at peace with all that. And that doesn't mean that you are, after that, you're cynical or something like that, and you act like a psychopath or something, just get whatever you want to. But it's more like you follow the sort of norms in general, and you also chop wood and carry water. You just do the normal things of life. You're a normal person with your height and your talents and your atoms and everything. And but at the same time, yeah, you're kind of wearing it all lightly. And it seems like in this state, you could be like the Taoist uh, the Taoist sage Shuangzi, who is like the most famous Taoist besides Lao Tzu, which most Westerners know about Lao Tzu, but the Shuangzi is the he wrote more directly himself directly. But anyway, like when his wife died, there's a story in his book where like a few days after, one of his friends came by his house, and he was like banging on a drum, kind of not seemingly not very perturbed. And he said, how can you be like this? I mean, this is a person who you lived with for so long and loved and raised your children. And he said, well, yeah, certainly for a few days I was very, very sad and grieving. But then after a few days, I realized that it's something like I did not make her. She was not mine to have. It was just that she came from another room into this room. And it was always going to be the case that she was going to leave this room and go into the next room. And I have no need to to question that that state. And
Hmm.
so he kind of realized to just be at peace with the as we say, the passing. So
Yeah, there's a lot I could reply to there. I think there's piece about the morality being kind of surface level that sort of maps on because you could you can say like, oh well, don't ever kill anybody, which is generally true, but there are instances where it's very moral to kill someone. A psychopath is going to stab somebody, you're being attacked, you have to defend your life. That's probably a good time to try. Um, so it's another way of saying there are no absolutes, and there's not really anything you can do to pin something down completely, which is also very Taoist. The way that can be named is not the true way is like the first line of the Tao Te Ching. So anything you can put into words is not really the thing. It's just an attempt to point to it.
Mhm.
But I think one of the things that interested me about this report that, sort of started this whole thing is that he gives these two snapshots of moments. One, he's on the train and he's reading the book and he has an emotional response. Um, so it's not something he's thinking about. It's not something he's like rationalized, like, oh yes, I understand mountains and rivers and the sun and the moon are nothing other than the mind. I understand that. Good. I am at peace with that. I'm good. He's like, oh no, I'm emotionally moved by that. Like I'm feeling the
Yeah.
truth of that. You use the word viscerally. The truth of that is something he's feeling viscerally.
Yeah.
But he covers his mouth and he's like, he's on the train and he's a Japanese businessman. We've all seen, I'm sure, enough Japanese movies that just of like the trains and enough to visualize it. And so I just see this guy sort of sitting there, like trying to kind of hide his emotion,
Yeah.
which is culturally very appropriate and, generally the right thing to do. But then he goes home and he goes to sleep. And in the middle of the night, something wakes him up
Yeah.
and he's laughing inhumanly.
Yeah.
His family is afraid for him. So all of these emotions are coming up. And and I don't want to say that that means that enlightenment has to be emotional. Some things I've heard is it's just sort of like, oh, okay. And you just kind of keep going. But what I see there is pointing to it comes from somewhere outside of the rational mind.
Mm.
Like he's asleep. His rational mind is shut down in that moment, and something in the unconscious, something deeper in, surfaces. Some understanding that's already in him surfaces into his conscious mind while sleeping, and and there's this shedding of the barriers that you see in the train. He's not
Mm.
hiding his mouth. He's laughing uproariously.
Mm.
I'm so delighted. I'm so delighted. I'm so moved. He's the little bit that he covered on the train, he's completely letting out. Like it just gets the flow through him. And then when it's done, it's gone. He's like, oh, that's past. So instead of it being like clamped down like this, there's this sense of like it having moved through and out. And
Mhm.
and and I don't mean to imply that the emotional movement is enlightenment, because I don't think it is specifically. Again, you can't tie it down, but I do think there's something to this story that shows that there is something, some higher power, some greater thing that is not our conscious mind, but that is in connection and communication, understanding of our conscious mind that will come and present itself in that way. And when it does, things that have been holding it back or that have been holding us back, beliefs that we have had, maybe not even consciously, but they just disappear. Traditionally speaking, and not in Zen, it's in a different school. I want to say the Theravada maybe, or the Burmese school of Zen. They'll have there's these like four paths. So like you have sort of first path, you have some sort of a awakening experience and enlightenment experience, and then you go like second, third, and fourth. And supposedly at each one of those, like certain fears drop away. So like at the first one, I don't remember the specifics. It's been years since I studied this. There's a book by Daniel Ingram called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha that people can look up if they really want to dive into this. It's very heady, but it talks about the whole path.
Mm.
But supposedly at the first path, like you're no longer afraid of death or something like that. Like some belief you had about what it meant to be yourself. You're like, oh, I'm not actually that thing. And the fear of death, like you're not consciously thinking of this, but just the unconscious roots that gave rise to it aren't there anymore.
Mm.
And then that continues to refine and refine through time.
Mm.
And I think koan practice is probably similar, although I don't think the koan practice has such a structured and linear model as the Burmese or the Thai maybe,
Mm.
um, the Theravada system. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
What was your did you have like me an emotional reaction to this account? Because to me, yeah, it was very emotional, very inspiring and made sense to me.
Um, I felt his joy
Mm.
in that moment of awake of awakening just from sleep, in that moment of awakening in the middle of the night, and the unexpectedness of it, and the permanent nature of it, I guess. Because so often, like, oh, well, we'll think we'll have a, funny joke or some lie, oh, I'm so happy, and then like a few days later, a day later or something, we've sort of forgotten about what it was. But here he has such a strong emotional experience that it wakes him in the middle of the night, and he's able to bring it to his teacher, and he's still feeling that, he's still shaking from it, like
Yeah.
hours or days later. I mean, that shows the depth from which it came, and I am moved by that. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I
I
think he had a profound realization. I mean, it's, he put into words a sort of story, but I think, yeah, I have a sense that yeah, he had like a profound understanding of reality of the mind, and that was a truly, yeah, kind of liberating, very, very powerful experience that would affect his thinking and his perceptions about everything after that.
mhm, mhm.
But yeah,
Which part
yeah.
of it did you have the emotional response to? Like, was there like, if you play it through your head like a movie, like the
Mhm.
story, like which part of the movie, which scene of it was the one that you were like, ah,
I actually the whole thing.
okay.
Yeah, he was on the train and he was reading something he had read many times before, and that in itself, when I think about that, the whatever it is, the sun, or the mountains and the rivers, the sun and the moon and the stars, or whatever it said, just basic things of nature that are sort of these seemingly permanent things, and things that I think of as like unliving, non-living things that are so different from like a human mind,
Hmm.
and they're the same. I feel like having some sort of understanding of their true identity with each other is something profound. And
Hmm.
of course you don't want to get all like narrowly logical and say, okay, so you're saying a mountain is thinking like I'm thinking now, like maybe, but also like no, that's not, you're not really thinking the right way. But yeah, some kind of identification of those things as part of the story of this whole thing that moved me. And yeah, and then he started to realize it. I feel I can there's something that makes sense to me about this whole story of the building up of it. And then yeah, and so he starts to, something flips or something in him. And then yeah, he goes home. He's still in ordinary life, but if this is almost like a myth. It's like he goes from the most ordinary thing, but there's this little voice from eternity, from the past, from a magical helper, from God or something that slips in there. And he has read it many times before. At first, it was, he could have almost dismissed it, and then he could have thought of it as something like, oh yeah, that's what the teachers say, but that doesn't get to me at all. Or oh, this is, it's the type of thing that might be plastered up on a wall somewhere because it's supposed to be important to us. And there's like, I can imagine some kind of progression, and not a linear progression, of course, but and now it's sunk in, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And now he starts to cry because he sees it. He sees it. He sees it. He's starting to see it. And then, but he's still in ordinary life. He's still just, on a train in a suit, gets off the train, but it's kind of repeating now in his head. And I guess that is something of the myth of the koan too, right? Like it's to be repeated, but it's like a new experience or something like that. It's repeating, but it's not the same or something like that. And then yeah, he goes home. He's still kind of, family life. His brother's over for like a visit. Kind of goes to bed with his family. And then yeah, I think soon after I think he went to bed like pretty late, like 11 or 11:30, and then soon after, yeah, he woke up and he's kind of groggy, but I almost imagine he's like of two minds at this point. There's the, like you're saying, the thing coming up from below that woke him up, but he's also kind of groggy and just kind of like his normal, still in his normal state of existence, but it's starting to repeat. It's starting to repeat. It's a drum, and it's yeah, I think this is how I imagine it, and this is yeah, maybe there is a more emotional resonance here because it is kind of the climax of the story in a way. And it's yeah, it's repeating, and yeah, the sky opens up and he's like beating his fists and like just like overwhelmed, and it's like my God, like the things that they've been saying that I wanted to believe, but I didn't. And I pretty much believed, but I didn't know. I didn't know.
Mm.
Uh, Even now, like I'm getting emotional, and this just resonates with me.
Yeah.
And and then yeah, and then especially yeah, the sky opens up, the empty sky opens up, and with 1,000 mouths, it laughs, and there's this dialogue. I think throughout this story, there's also a dialogue. Him
Mm.
with the text, him with his teacher, him with reality, him with his mind. And yeah, there's this resonance of the sky and himself. And yeah, like you mentioned, someone had later told him that the laugh that he laughed was inhuman, inhuman. And and yeah, and then so yeah, they're trying to get him to calm down. They thought he went insane. It all makes sense to me somehow, just from things I've experienced a hint of, or slightly more than a hint of, once in a while, and things that I've read in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Do you know this book by Robert Pirsig?
I think you actually got me into it in high school. I remember
Yeah,
reading
I
it in high
liked it.
school. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But he had an awakening experience, and I don't know if he'd done meditation, but I know he was into Eastern philosophy, and he was a very deep kind of methodical thinker. He kind of came up with his own philosophy, but he did have like an awakening experience once where he said he was in touch with quality, and then of course, yeah, and then people put him in a mental hospital and everything.
Hmm.
But and there might have been also, it might have, one might take from that lesson that it's good to be part of sort of a tradition in a community too, to be able to channel, to communicate, and to contain certain things. So maybe, you're not literally thought of as mad and seem mad, and maybe start to go mad a little bit because you don't have the natural structure and people that we kind of need to contain a huge liberating experience of the mind.
Yeah. And I think just to add on to that, I would say I think it's helpful to have somebody recognize it for what it is, somebody who can
Oh,
recognize it for what it is,
nice. I
you
didn't even
know,
think about that part. Yeah.
because if you're just like some dude like Persig in that book, like if you just have this realization and there's no one to ground you and be like, yes, congratulations, that's great, you know, this is all perfectly normal,
Yeah.
and here's what you do next.
Yeah.
You're going to be kind of looking for somebody to reorient you in that
Right.
way. Maybe, it seems like you would, and if you don't have that, you may unfortunately
Yeah. Yeah.
spin further out.
Yeah.
Although I would say that's more a case of trying to grasp onto it,
Mm.
the spinning out, than it is the whole thing will e equilibrate itself, um, given time and attention and lack of grasping. But if you try and pin it down, I think, well, I have been told very clearly that you're in trouble if you try and pin it
That
down.
makes sense.
Yeah, I can get
And
into
what
that more later, but go ahead.
and what you said, that a teacher might tell you this is all perfectly normal.
Hmm.
can help you not to be like, okay, I just need this forever. Like I need this high, this is God, it's so.
Yeah. 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 And something I remember from, and the Zen people say this too, although they use very different maps, but something I remember from the time I spent studying the Burmese tradition I was talking about, that was with this guy, Kenneth Folk in New York. Um, Daniel Ingram wrote the book. Daniel Ingram studied with Kenneth, like they were sort of buddies. But I met Kenneth, so that's who I was working with. They used to have they may still have a forum online, Dharma Overground, I think it's called. But oh shoot, what was my point? Um, yeah, so in that model, there's a like you practice really hard. It's a pretty heavy practice model. And there's the saying that like enlightenment is an accident, but practice makes you accident prone. I've always liked that because
That's pretty good.
it's not something you get from the practice, but the practice makes it more likely to happen on its
Yeah,
own.
that makes
Uh,
sense.
but in the Burmese model, they'll have like you practice really hard and you go through these stages that if you're doing their practices are fairly reliable, supposedly.
Mm,
Mine didn't work out that way, but
mm,
I don't know that maybe I didn't practice hard enough.
mm,
You go through these stages and you'll have this moment of breakthrough.
mm,
It's in that model, it's called the arising and passing away. And
mm,
most people mistake that for, oh, I'm enlightened. Oh, I had this great, I
mm,
understand now everything. And unfortunately, what follows that in their model is what they call the dukkha nanas, or the
mm,
suffering stages. And so
mm,
you sort of have this peak experience, and then you go down and you go through a lot of your shit comes up. I forget exactly. It's like anger and then or depression and then anger and then despair or something. Again, it's been a long time. I'm never quite sure if I made it far enough to have those experiences,
mm.
even in my own practice. But you have this moment, and then you kind of go through, and you kind of your some darker stuff comes up, and you have to kind of sit through that, and then things slowly start to clarify, like the mud settles in the
Mm.
water and it just sort of clarifies. And you can get stuck there forever. Like there are people that just they get so depressed that they're like they don't maintain their practice because they think their practice is, you know, making
Brought
them
them
depressed
there.
or something, or
Mm.
it's but that's actually it is, but that's supposedly what you have to go through. And then you come through this sort of period of equanimity, and then there's this like something happens somewhere in there, which even talking about it sets people up. I'm probably guilty. I'm ruining my karma. Sets people up to like start looking for it and expecting it to happen, which is the last thing you want to do in that space because you have to let it touch you. You can't touch it. If you think you're there to move to touch it, you're already separating yourself from it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, it makes sense.
I think it's an important thing. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, and for the account that we started it with, yeah, there's the climax where the sky opens up and yeah, they think his family thinks he's insane. And then yeah, he spends the next day kind of by himself like crying and like alternating between like laughing and crying and then either that day or the next day, he goes and visits his teacher, kind of validates his experience, and also, yeah, mentions it as a particularly powerful kind of experience, and gives him tips of how to further go on after that.
Mhm.
And yeah, the even 2 or 3 days later, yeah, his skin is quivering as he's writing about it. I mean, yeah, it's the whole thing just makes sense to me, and it is just very, very, very powerful. I mean, I guess partially it just makes sense as an awakening experience. And for some reason, just because of my mystical experiences, including like a really bad trip well, a really painful trip, but it was interesting
Mhm.
on when I was in high school on mushrooms. Uh, and other kind of mystical experiences I've had, just two other ones besides that.
Mhm.
Kind of yeah, it somehow just makes sense to me. And I think in my reading of philosophy, reading and discussion of philosophy, my kind of feeling like I'm seeing between the words, between seeing into rather than seeing the concepts.
Hmm.
Something about that, all that sort of, I don't know, something about all that. His story kind of really makes sense to me. Is very, very powerful and very gives me hope for, yeah, a kind of liberation from, yeah, just like the almost the cliche goes of Buddhism, that of liberation from suffering, and sort of on the other end of it being able to be like relatively relaxed and good to people and not take things personally and be like a pretty useful and human being. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, man, to say.
I was wondering though, you wanted to talk about our kind of uh maybe mystical experiences or things. Did have you had any, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I've had one that stands out pretty strongly. Um, I've had a few others that were not as strong. Um, it's interesting looking back on them to think about them. But I'm also interested in yours. I mean, a painful trip on mushrooms is definitely a thing. And you said you had a few other things there as well, so I'd love to hear about those. Um, and yeah, just something about the way you described the story had me really feel it viscerally, had me feel, because like he's shaking, so like his
Yeah.
body, his nervous system itself is, there's something that's touching his nervous system,
Yeah.
his body, and then he's also having these emotions, so it's touching his emotional system, and then he's also he's thinking clearly, he's able to have conversations and form words, and there's some level of conscious understanding
Yeah.
of I know what the mind being the mountains and the rivers and the stars and the moon. I understand that viscerally. I have
Yeah.
so it's speaking through like all parts of his system.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and that I think is really powerful. Um, most of my sort of awkward, odd experiences are more emotional. Um, and there was only one that really hit me somewhat like this guy's. Um, and luckily I had somebody to go to with it too. But I was sitting at the monastery in New York. This was upstate New York, New York State. This was 2009. This was June 2009, and during a sesshin, which in Zen is I think it's like 7 to 10 days of meditation intensive experience. So you go, you stay at the monastery, you get up at 5 o'clock, you meditate for an hour and a half. They do a little talk. You meditate for an hour and a half. You have breakfast. You meditate for an hour and a half. You get up and you do some cleaning. You clean the place. You meditate for an hour and a half. You have lunch. Except like it's the whole day up until like 8 or 9 o'clock, and then you go to bed and you're expected to get up again in the morning. And you do that like every day for a week or a little bit more. And so this was maybe my first one of those. I'm not sure. Um, but I was sitting and I remember a few things, and I don't know how they all fit together at this point. But I remember there being a strong burning in my right jaw, like something was working its way down.
Hmm.
And then it hit some kind of resistance. There's like burning sensation, and it stopped, and it got hotter and hotter, and then it like exploded and moved through, and I had the sense of just like, oh, like something had dropped away, not like him, not like the guy, but just like a little bit of a tension around my head had dropped away, and I was like, oh, like something felt clearer. I think that happened first earlier on in the day, and then later on towards the evening, um at dinner, I I was listening to a lot of Eckhart Tolle at the time, and one of his first books was Stillness Speaks. So I think I was listening to that, and oh, this whole thing is in silence. So there's no talking, there's no even any eye contact. You're supposed to kind of keep your attention withdrawn in yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and so, indeed, I'm at dinner, but I'm sitting there just by myself, and it sort of pops into my head like, oh, stillness speaks, and like, what would it say? And then I hear this voice say, "Watch me." And I'm like, "What?" And then I feel something in the right side of my brain, like right up here. Like it feels like this box opens, like the lid, like a jack in the box. This box opens and another box pops out of it, but that box is bigger than the first one.
Hmm.
And then that opens and like more, and it just sort of builds and builds and bubbles out of my head.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what the fuck? And this urgency runs up through my body, and like I have to leave, I have to go. So I run out the door, the back of the dining hall, and up the hill, and I go to the graveyard that's on the monastery grounds, which I had spent some time sitting in the day or two before. It's for when the monastics pass, they bury them up there, or community members too, I suppose. And I go up there, and I'm sitting in the graveyard, and I have this like something big shifts, and like all of a sudden my experience becomes from my solar plexus, like this expanding sphere. So like I don't know if you remember the old oh, what are they called? The screensavers. Like it would start with like a color in the middle, and then another color would appear, and the first color would kind of expand outwards, and
Hmm.
then another one it would expand outwards. So it's just this
Hmm.
like these pixels of color expanding.
Hmm.
And then every ring would be the same color. And so a new color would come and it would kind of grow that way. It
Hmm.
felt like that, like there were these micro thin layers expanding from my solar plexus, and
Hmm.
each layer was like that's what reality was made of. It was just these layers expanding, and it included what I normally think of as myself and what I think of as the world, like in the layers at the same time. And I just sort of I sat there with that and experienced that, and then it faded, and I came back to like normal consciousness, and my response was was not, oh, the Buddhas and patriarchs have told me the truth. I turned my head up to God and I said, well, you can't take that away from me, which I think speaks more to my psychology than anything else. But that was my honest response in that moment. Um, and I went back inside. And I talked to the one of the teachers. There were two guys helping hold the session. So
Hmm.
I was able to meet with one of them. They had like face to face during the day. So I went in to meet with him. I told him what happened. And he was like, "Hey, yeah, congratulations. Like you're on the path now. Um, what you don't want to do is reach out and grab, well, he didn't say the path. I think he said you're on the ride. You're on the roller coaster.
Hmm.
The first thing the last thing you want to do is reach out and grab the first signpost that goes by and hold on to it." And I was like, okay, yeah,
That sounds good.
yeah. So I didn't think about it for a long time, but the memory of it, of that experience stuck with me. And then I recently came across some journals that I had kept at that time. And I kept a journal of like the day before what had happened and the day after, and I had just left out the middle part because I was like, I don't want to grab the signpost.
Hmm.
Um, but it has stuck with me since then. So now I can tell it as a story of like such things are possible. They happen. Um, it was one of the first big things that sort of started a series of other weird experiences in my life that eventually had me move out to Portland. And I'm met with the shaman that I work with. Like it just everything just sort of went pretty crazy from there. But it did show me that there's something to this life that is more important and stronger than what I can control. And that it's not something I can surrender. I can abdicate my responsibility to. I can't just be like, okay, like enlighten me. You're bigger than me anyway. Like I still have to show up, but the thing that comes does not come from me. Not what I normally think of as me. And I don't really have to worry about it as much. Is kind of what I think I would say what that left me with is just like, well, I didn't plan that. I didn't think it was going to happen. my only part in the whole thing seemed to be doing the practice. Um, and yet it wasn't doing the practice that had it happen. It was eating dinner, and just something popped into my head, and then it popped into my head, and I listened to it. Like I interacted with it. I didn't just brush it aside.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And you
yeah, yeah.
literally heard a voice, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, again, this was what, 16 years ago. So,
But
I can't, but that's the memory and the experience was that something,
it was something
something
like
said
that.
that to me. Yeah.
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 You had an interaction, just like I kind of parsed out the account from the Japanese executive that it was a dialogue. You had some kind of, yeah. I think of it as some kind of dialogue or something, but I'm kind of, yeah, I'm into the idea of dialogue and everything, and it seems fruitful.
hmm hmm Well, we've talked in the past about like the daimon or the guide, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
think this is the kind of thing I would expect, from that. If there is some type of entity or some type of thing built into the human soul that, reflects God as a teacher within ourself, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Um, that's how I imagine it would work. Just kind of a quiet voice that says something, and if you listen to it, um, maybe things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thinking in the Christian tradition, it almost seems like maybe some kind of, yeah, genius or daimon or angel spoke to you, and then you kind of had like this experience with reality, and then you kind of like struggled with God, kind of, and you were almost like rebellious against God or something, kind of maybe realizing something about your relationship with Him or something.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, that thanks for bringing that back up, because that's not something I've really been able to talk about with anybody, because I don't think I brought that up even with the teacher at the time, because we have very short windows. So I just wanted to tell him what happened and then get a
Hmm.
reply.
Uh,
Um, but I've wondered about that since then, because it's such a reinforcement of an adversarial relationship with God, which, like, I don't consciously want an adversarial relationship with God. Some people do, and that's fine. Depends on how you define God. But apparently, I have some kind of story in my unconscious that,
mm,
like, there's an entity that wants to take things from me,
mm,
and yet I was gifted this moment of some kind of altered state that was not drug induced, that which I've had
mm,
some of those too, but
mm.
this was not. This was totally on the natch, as they say.
Hmm.
And like, what a gift. Like, what kind of a response is like, what
Yeah.
so God's not going to take the memory of the thing that I was just given ostensibly by God, if you're looking at this whole thing through a God framework. Like, I don't want to be that guy. And I think that's something that I still struggle with, is who who am I? Who do I believe myself to be, such that, like, that's what came up? Because it's all
Mm,
it's all unconscious. It's in my system somewhere. But I'm also not sure that that is necessarily something worth digging into. I mean, it's
mm.
it's worth considering, it's worth inquiring about, but I don't want to make it into something that, like, oh, well, this is a wrong thing about me, and
Yeah.
therefore I
Yeah.
have to get rid of it. Or it
Yeah.
just, I want to be curious about it because God lets it exist under that framework. So why shouldn't I?
Mm,
And can I care for it? Can I be interested in it instead of trying to define it and control it or dissect it, or take
mm.
it apart? So
Yeah. Do you
yeah.
have more thoughts about that you want to share about what, yeah, what that means, or does that seem to be a part of who you seem to be, or you did seem to be?
Um, it's definitely still something I struggle with. Um, Sort of my place of belonging in the world and where I fit in. And I can feel, in talking about it right now, I can feel some anger coming up,
Mm,
shaking your fist at God, kind of anger, but it's coming up from like my gut, like the middle of my gut.
Mm,
And around it I can feel this sort of like loving compassion.
mm,
Um, but it feels very insistent on what it believes.
mm,
And I know that, it's very black and white. Like
mm,
it's very like, no, this is how it is. And I
mm.
know that anytime something is that concentrated and that certain of itself, that it's probably um something, especially when it's forced. Like, no, this is how it is. You don't understand. Like there's
Yeah.
that, you can feel the tension around that kind of attitude, as opposed to like, no, I think this is how it is. Like it's just clear.
Mm,
Like the
yeah.
sky's blue.
It's not
Like I don't have to get
confident.
angry about the sky being blue.
Yeah.
I don't have to get angry about the fact that I don't know, my hair is brown or whatever. I'm wearing this shirt.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So.
Yeah. It almost does sound a little like a teenage rebellion. It's not confident. It's overly assertive.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's my first impression. But
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's a good point. Um, Yeah, so it's not something I think I'm going to necessarily see through in this moment on this podcast.
yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
But
You don't need to.
it does. I mean, it just, it's like I would hope that our Japanese businessman Roshi that we're discussing his story that he kindly provided, like I would hope that, in 10 years time he would go back and read that letter that he wrote and he might have a sense of um the importance of inhuman laughter, maybe. The need for the heart to express itself, um, at least at times, without suppression, without stricture, you know. So, and in that same way, for me, like looking back on what I remember, my not as significant experience, I imagine, that I am certainly not trying to recreate it. I don't think that I can. I don't think that it's helpful. I certainly didn't get there by imagining that I was going to get there. So
Mm,
why would I try to imagine myself trying to get there again? Like
yeah.
that's not what got me there the first time. Do what got me there the first time, see what shows up this time. The whole thing is a surprise. But just like how he was able to contact, what was it? What was it? I'm so overjoyed. I'm so, what was it? What were his words?
I think so.
Um,
I think he said, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, laughed loudly and wildly. Um,
when he was talking to his teacher, said something.
yes. Attainment of the empty. Yes, I am overjoyed. I am overjoyed. I kept repeating, striking my thigh with vigor. Tears came, which I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
I tried to relate to him the experience of that night, but my mouth trembled and words wouldn't form themselves. In the end, I just put my face in his lap. Patting me on the back, he said, well, well, it is rare indeed to experience to such a wonderful degree. It is termed attainment of the emptiness of mind. You are to be congratulated. And he,
Wow.
yeah, thanks to you, I murmured, and again wept for joy.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel in myself a longing, you know. Um,
Yeah, don't you feel like something like that? I just feel like that could be something that could really give you the I don't know. I feel like on the other side of that, your mind would just be much more clear and you'd be much more able to just, like I was saying before, like be a decently happy and good person to others, you know?
hmm hmm
I feel like that's a marker of like true spiritual uh I want to use the word enlightenment, but not necessarily in the Buddhist way of just the ultimate enlightenment, but some kind of enlightenment or awakening experience where other people around you say that, yes, definitely you are a better person to be around. I feel like I've heard, we've talked about Ian McGilchrist, like he said things like that, like the left-brained way of thinking is you're just a better person to be around after that. I feel like that's such a great marker. But yeah, of spiritual attainment. But yeah, I feel like after this experience that we're talking about, he, like, anyone would be a much better person to be around, like after having experienced that and the change, you know?
Yeah, I just think so much of that stricture drops away, would be my guess, is just like you're you're freer to be yourself,
Yeah,
whatever
right.
that is,
Yeah,
and
exactly. I agree.
yourself is less problematic too. Like
Yeah,
you don't have the because you don't have the strictures, you're not overcompensating in other ways. Everything's just kind
right.
of a little more like evenly flowing instead of
Yeah.
these like sharp peaks and these mountains and these rivers.
Yeah. But yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, you're not, I don't know, whatever we're doing normally, imposing a certain image of yourself on yourself and others, or trying to play a role and getting frustrated, or I don't know. Yeah, you're just able to more just live your life. I don't know. So there's sometimes in spirit, talking about spirituality or philosophy, you sometimes you either go into like paradox or cliches, but I don't know. They're kind of like true. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the cliche, like the Zen cliche is the sound of one hand clapping, right? But that's a koan, and you have to work that out. But I wanted to read. This has reminded me. Um, since I mentioned Daniel Ingram of Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha book, this will take me a moment to find. But he wrote a let's see. Oh, I can probably just do this. He wrote a description of enlightenment,
mm, wow.
or of his experience, or something like that.
Mm,
Um, that so I actually haven't read this in a long time. Um, this
I'm
was
curious.
I have a tendency of copying things off of Facebook that I find inspiring, and this
Mm,
was the first one I ever did. So it's been a number
wow.
of years, but it's called The Kazoo Player and the Symphony. And I'm just going to read it because I don't know if this is in a book or what, but it's relatively short and we can experience it all together. Um, so this is The Kazoo Player and the Symphony by Daniel Ingram. Imagine there is a great symphony orchestra in a concert hall, and in front of it, like an absurd comedy act, sits a clearly nervous kazoo player with no music score in front of him. The orchestral introduction begins, and the poor kazoo player, who has no idea what piece will be played, tries to give his best rendition of the orchestra's chosen symphony. He is about a half second behind them, playing the notes just after he hears them. As he is a kazoo player, he can only play one note at a time, so his impression of the orchestra is a very crude one, hitting on selected highlights of the melody, making for a very small and very simple version of the rich and intricate multi-part score of the symphony that this orchestra is playing beautifully in all its glory. Now, imagine that certain audience members have been cursed to believe that they can only hear the symphony after the kazoo player plays his rendition of it. Beginning meditators are nearly all thusly cursed. We observe like the kazoo player, and eventually we get good at noticing, to hang on to the notes of the kazoo player, delighting in his performance as crude, linear, and simple as it is. However, at some point, some of us notice that we can also hear the symphony just as it is, just on its own, that the weave of sounds is coming in from the symphony also, and this is known without the kazoo player having to make a limited, absurd, out of time, delayed facsimile of it. Soon, some of the concert goers are going to begin to find the kazoo player silly, like some sort of joke that ruins the majesty of the symphony as it is. Finally, imagine that someone suddenly puts music in front of the kazoo player such that he joins the symphony, becomes just one more part of the grand sweep of the melody, largely lost amidst the grandeur of the hundreds of other players giving it their all. Our awakening is like that, in that we finally are just caught up in the performance without having to feel like we need some poor kazoo player to interpret and imitate the symphony for us, and definitely without having to feel like we have to be up on stage being the kazoo player ourselves. I can relate to the kazoo player. And we've talked
Yeah.
about Ian McGill-Christ and his like left brain, right brain, and I think left brain, the kazoo player and the left brain, and having to filter everything through the left brain and having everything have to be structured and conceptualized and understood before we can even
Yeah.
experience it.
Right.
It becomes silly after a certain point, and you don't have to let the left brain be the only thing that tells you what reality is. But to
Yeah.
do that, you have to find the symphony that's already playing. And I think that's enlightenment, or at least some level of awakening is
Yeah.
how much you're able to hear the symphony that's already playing instead of only listening to the kazoo player's off-timed, badly mimicked interpretation of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Uh, uh,
So he had an experience of he awakened, or he has some kind of experience of awakening.
Daniel
Anyway, he has
Ingram,
enough. Yeah.
Daniel Ingram proudly declares himself fully enlightened and an arhat, and says it's not that hard to do and you can do it too, and he helps people do it. So it is not, and he doesn't like helping people do it. He kind of it's hard to track him down as far as I know. He's kind of weird, he's kind of grumpy, but like I think it's legit at least to some degree. I'm more of
Mm.
the opinion that you have awakening experiences and they there are certain stages where you can't go back from, and there may be a stage where the sense of self you can't kind of drop back into having a sense of self. People like Adyashanti talk about that. Maybe Eckhart Tolle talks about that kind of a thing too. Um, but I still think there's levels of development beyond that, and I don't know exactly what Daniel Ingram would say. I don't know him at all. I don't know him well. I
Mm.
know of him through his association with this group I used to be a part of back in the mid 2000s. It was kind of a thing for me anyway.
Mm.
And so I can't speak to him too much, but yes, he claims to have gone through all four paths of the Theravada model or the Burmese model. And there's a book, um, I think it's by Mahasi Sayadaw, um, Stages of Insight. It's a really plain title, something like that. And he kind of lays it all out. And the stories I have heard is you'll go on retreat to Burma and you'll leave retreat and the monks will say, "Oh, well, come back and next time you'll hit third path, like you'll get it, buddy." Like they just lay it out like it's no big thing.
Mm.
Um, Now that's the Arhat model, which is the Theravada model. The Zen is Mahayana, so it's a much more complicated system.
Mm.
I don't need to, I mean, I can, but I don't need to get too heavily into Buddhist ontology right now.
Mm.
Um, um, but there's a big difference depending on, well, not depending on who you ask, between the arhats who are there for their own enlightenment and their nirvana, the extinguishment of themselves, and there's the bodhisattvas who are working towards the enlightenment of all beings,
Mm.
and they put off their own enlightenment until all beings are enlightened, and that in and of itself is a koan that I don't understand. Um, because I don't think it's that codependency of like, well, no, 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 no. I have to take care of everybody else first. I can't take care of myself like that. I think that can be how it gets interpreted, but I don't think that's the point of it.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway.
Did you want to, you had suggested we talk about our experiences too. Did you want me to talk about one of mine?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know if you had sort of like I don't want to push people to do anything, but I wasn't sure if you had said everything you were willing to say earlier. But I would love to hear however much you would love to share. Yeah, you would want to share.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'd only thought of the two other experiences that I'd had until this podcast when I thought of the sort of bad trip on mushrooms that I had. But that's maybe the more interesting one to talk about here. Um, so yeah, it was like very painful. And I kept wanting it to end, and it had a cyclical nature.
Hmm.
And it was funny because there was this friend or acquaintance that I'd had. I was with a very small group of people, but this guy and I ended up embracing and comforting each other, which was kind of weird. Like we didn't know each other that well. And we later became friends, but it was weird that we kind of just ended up like embracing each other and kind of comforting each other. But yeah, yeah, I remember. So we were in the woods a little ways off from a road, and I remember a truck driving by, and it seemed in my memory the lights on in the cab, but and I remember looking in and just so I'm realizing there's this person in normal life driving a truck as we're going through this enhanced kind of experience. And kind of looking at it, not able to comprehend how that person could be doing something simply like driving a truck with all the myriad kinds of thoughts that are always in our head. So I had this idea that, yeah, I wasn't going through what I was going through that was different than normal, but more like I was just realizing what was always going on in our heads. It's just we don't really aren't consciously aware of it or something like that. For some reason, I was thinking that I'm not in an altered state, but I'm in just a more aware state of how things always are for us.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that was one weird part of that. Another was that I remember sort of in the sort of visual of my mind, this big, dark, kind of spherical space. All the people in my life were kind of inhabited like different levels and things, and they all kind of came to like the same level.
Hmm.
Just kind of seems like it means something. Uh, and then, yeah,
But
there was
did
something.
that feel like a good thing? Like all of them. So like there was this space and they were all in it, and then they sort of equalized each other.
Yeah. It
Oh,
didn't
cool.
feel good or bad. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
know. It's
Okay.
just, yeah. And then actually, there was a third thing I was going to mention, but I can't remember it right now. So.
Ah,
But then, yeah, maybe sort of like a little tiny bit like the account that we read, how it affected him days later. I remember it affected that trip, kind of affected me weeks up to like weeks later, just kind of remembering the different state of mind and just being
hmm.
affected by it and kind of disturbed. Um,
Yeah. Well, what in the description you gave just now, I didn't hear anything that would clearly seem as particularly painful or
yeah, it's
disturbing.
weird.
So,
Yeah.
so like when you say painful, like do you remember feeling pain in your system somewhere, or was it just sort of like that sort of mental pain of like I don't know. I'm curious where the word painful comes from.
Yeah, I just remember it was like it was like suffering. It was like a terrible experience.
Oh,
Like I kept every moment I wanted it to end, and I kept keeping track as the cycles, the sort of mental experiential cycles passed. I was like trying to keep track of how many cycles had already passed with the sort of idea that like every one that passes, it's gonna is one less that I have to go through.
wow.
And it'll like get better. But yeah, I it wasn't like in my yeah, a particular way. It just seemed like it was just suffering. Like
Hmm.
it was very, very unpleasant. Um, I remembered another thing. Um, oh God, I forgot it again. Yeah, it's weird. Oh, this is not what I wanted to mention, but another thing that one of my another friend that was with that I was with at the time said I did some kind of like uh some kind of horrible howling or something like that. And I vaguely remember doing that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he
Yeah. I mean,
remarked on it like he didn't even know if he could ever make some sound like that or something like that. Like it seemed to come from some weird place. Like, so yeah.
wow. Yeah, that sounds painful as hell, man.
Yeah, some kind of, yeah, it must have been some kind of expression of that. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember
yeah,
doing it, but I don't have any memory of what it might have sounded like or anything.
yeah, 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 yeah. Like the one time I've done mushrooms, I have a few, nothing that profound, but I have a few memories of things, and I have a few memories of people telling me things, and they don't all they don't all match up.
Mm,
But I can understand that like sort of vagueness of it, the reality, but it's hard to pin down what exactly it was and how it was happening. Yeah,
mm.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about all that. I wasn't even, didn't even think about bringing it up until we started talking, but
yeah. Yeah. I mean the only thing that I think I could add to it is the sense of suffering and the sense of the cycles seems very Buddhist. Like
mm,
the 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 cycles of existence, the cycles of karma, the you're sort of trapped in these loops of behavior, of your life being kind of the same over and over again, and the sort of existential despair that can underlie that
mm,
um, is, I think, one of the marks of existence. Like I'm not going to say yes or no whether that's exactly what you were experiencing, but it reminds me of it. The suffering. I mean, the first noble truth of Buddhism is life is suffering, and the second one is suffering is caused by clinging, and I think the third one is you can be free of suffering, and the fourth one is the Eightfold Path, which is how you get free of suffering. That's like the core, that is the core teachings of the Buddha. With all due respect to Daniel Ingram, I think he would still agree with me. Um, that's like the heart of Buddhism is the Four Noble Truths, and the first one being suffering, that life is suffering, and the word dukkha means basically, I mean, etymologically, I don't know if they would necessarily translate, but etymologically, it comes from the idea of the axle hole in a wheel. So like as the wheel is turning, uh, if it's smooth, that's sukha, sweetness, and if it's bumpy, so if you know the wheels got rock going over rocks, or the axle itself is uneven and the wheels kind of or the wheel is kind of square and it's clumping along, like every turn of the wheel is uncomfortable. There's this moment of discomfort with it going by, and it just kind of like it that is the nature of reality of life. That and in fact, my I was reading over my notes about my own experience in preparation for our call today, and the teacher I was working with gave a talk, and the line I remember from it was that the the truth that life is suffering is what he was talking about it as a joyful thing. And my notes say that it's joyful because it means suffering isn't a punishment. It's not like, oh, if I were only a better person, if I were only something, if I were only behaved properly, I wouldn't have to suffer, which is very Christian. Um, but with this understanding, it's like, oh, there's always something discomforting about life. There's all and rather than try to fix it, maybe try and come up with a different relationship to it,
yeah,
you
that
know.
makes sense.
Um, what was it? You can either pave the entire road in leather or you can wear shoes.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think that was Trump or Rinpoche who said that. I'm not sure. I've heard that's a quote from somebody. That's not an original, but I do quite like it.
Although, I mean, don't shit. I mean, there has to be a big caveat though of like also develop wisdom, right? Because like sometimes you are just doing stupid things, right? Or that are causing you or others suffering, or you do sometimes need to look into something, and you can see how foolishly you are acting or perceiving something, and you can shift your perception, right? And there's a reframing or whatever, or different action, like, and it could be something simple, like you need to take good care of your health, or an addiction, or a certain practice, or whatever, right? I mean, there is sometimes that, right? Like,
Well, yeah,
there's inevitable and mm,
I'll say a couple of things to that. Was one for sure, and I think this is a case of, like we were saying earlier, the thing that you put into words is never true, because as soon as you put it into words, then you can
mm,
have an opposite to it. So like yeah, you're right. But I will also say that so like I can meaning I can say, oh well, everything is suffering, and that means a certain true thing. It points to a certain
mm,
thing, but it also excludes the stuff that you're talking about because of the way I chose to put it into words. When the truth of it is, yes, of course, everything is suffering, and some suffering, I don't know, you could say some suffering is optional. Some
mm,
suffering is to be seen through. But I also think that when we're talking about dukkha, when we're talking about like a mark of reality, we're not talking about suffering as in being a dick to your wife, or cutting somebody off in traffic,
mm,
or somebody cutting you off in traffic. Um, th Those I don't think will quite qualify. It's much more intimate and has much more to do with the experience that we're normally not even consciously interpreting as ourself, and then how everything else relates to that self.
mm,
Um, that a lot of the suffering comes from that. And so rather than trying to fix each suffering thing, each thing that rubs up against you and makes you unhappy, or rubs up against you and makes you unhappy, and then you lash out at somebody, if instead you turn and you look and you investigate, what actually am I?
mm,
Who am I? What is this self? I mean, you've got the Greeks, the Oracle of Delphi, the know thyself
mm,
was over the Oracle at Delphi, so that's goes back to like Socrates and before. And then Ramana Maharshi, the one of the deeply realized teachers from India in relatively recent years. I think he was maybe around in the 50s or 70s or something, maybe earlier. But there are photos of him. So he's we're not talking like 100, 200 years ago. Well, I guess we are at this point, but you know what I mean. We're not
mm,
talking
yeah,
ancient
yeah,
India. We're talking modern India.
yeah,
Ramana Maharshi, his practice that he's known for is the who am I meditation. And you sit and you investigate almost philosophically, like what is this thing that I take to be myself? And he says that the question becomes like a stick that stirs the fire. And so you stir the fire and the fire kicks up, and the stick of the question starts to melt away, and yourself, the thing you're looking at, starts to melt away under your investigation. And then I don't know what the fuck happens, but the idea being that rather than trying to solve these individual points of dukkha, you realize they are all caused by this misunderstanding of what yourself is, and the way you act as if this self were real, and you are offended, and you lash out and all these things, because you're coming from this place of, oh, I am this self that I think I am, when the things that you are considering as yourself are real and they do need to be considered, but they are not true of themselves. They're at best, they're a part of you. They're temporary. They arise, they go away. And you have to have the experience of that, enough things coming up and going away that you don't take them as yourself anymore. And then like the layer kind of peels off. And I think that's probably the best thing I can say about how I think of awakening is like I'm already myself, and I have this puppet that I psychological puppet that I hold up, and I'm like, this is me, and I have to make sure that this puppet is the way it's supposed to be, and people are treating it the way they're supposed to treat it. Which I think goes back to the kazoo player. That's kind of the kazoo. It's the one little thing that I'm trying to make be myself and have the world respect and act like it's myself. And if I just don't think about it too much and I don't conceptualize myself, it's not that I exist as purely blank of concepts, because that in of itself is another concept. Like I exist blank of concepts and the concept of no concept, and I'm just you can't really say what you are, but that's the experience. Um, you're no longer tied down by things, and they no longer cause that suffering. You're no longer stuck in that recursive loop because the thing that's stuck in the loop isn't you anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, what you said makes sense about, yeah, that investigation of the self, and you eventually realize all these little points of suffering in your life are connected to this self that, that you've constructed or that you can let go of or something. It becomes this meta kind of concept that you can kind of, if you if you see it as this big pattern in your life, you can kind of let it go after that.
Yeah,
Mm.
and it's I think it's very experiential because I think a lot of people could take that and be like, okay, well then I have to think about this place and I have to think about how I'm this place that I'm irritated and I have to think about, okay, what does that mean? And I have to dissect this part of myself and like don't waste your time. There's always going to be another thing. It doesn't like it's more universal than that, and it's something it's a process that's going on all the time underneath the surface, and you have to kind of understand the process in the moment, alive in this experience, in this lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
and not as a conceptual overlay. And that distinction is hard, but it's the conceptual overlays that leave you in that loop that you were experiencing. Or if we're at least drawing the metaphor of your experience to the sort of karmic
Mm-hmm.
cycles, it's thinking of yourself as um, subject to it rather than just a part of things.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to be the kazoo player, following the symphony, and making sure you're playing the notes you're supposed to play, and running it all through the checker first before you do anything. Um,
Yeah, that makes sense as to maybe why I was suffering. Because, yeah, it's like I was thinking about it too much. I was trying to hold on to something. I was afraid to let go. Something like that makes
mm, mm,
sense with how I understand myself, to think that's why I was suffering.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes
Mhm.
sense.
I know of another guy in a different tradition who I won't name, although he talks about this openly, but I won't name for just I'll leave it be. But when he had his awakening type experiences, he says he shit his pants because he was so afraid. Um, which the you are experiencing the death, the passing away of the thing that you on a very visceral level
Mm.
consider to be yourself,
Yeah, that is
and
pretty crazy. And yeah,
it's
it would be
scary. Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. And I do think that there is an upwelling of unconscious emotional material, just like we were talking about with our friend on the train. And it's very unique to the person what comes up, but it's going to be something not your usual self. It's going to be a Jungian like coincidence of opposites coming together, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, was there other kinds of experiences you wanted to talk about today?
I think that's the main one. You said you had a few other ones, but I don't know if you wanted to get into those or you feel kind of complete.
Yeah, I feel okay for now. I mean, I mean, I would say they were significant in that they pointed me to like things that were important to me,
Hmm.
which actually have to do with this podcast, like philosophy and folklore.
Hmm.
The two involved those two activities. So yeah, I wouldn't even have much to say about the experiences, but yeah, they seem to point to some type of, yeah, passion and liberation and, yeah, insight and realization from those two things, from philosophy and folklore, which is kind of after a lot of hemming and hawing for decades or years, I'm kind of finally with this podcast and with other things trying to actually do finally.
Nice.
So,
Follow that voice. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to that. That's nice.
Okay. Okay. Well, sounds good. So maybe next time we'll talk about the story of the myth of the what was it? The boy who kind of found
Of
his
this,
way,
yeah, the spirit in the bottle.
the spirit in the bottle, right?
Yeah.
Or perhaps some other folklore or something. So, but yeah, yeah, sounds good. So, until then.